Hello, everyone. My name is J.R. Cordray, and I work on the marketing team over here at INMOBI. We're very excited about today's webinar on in-app header bidding and mediation, and we're so glad that you could all join today. Before we kick things off, I'd just like to mention a few housekeeping items. First, today's webinar is going to be recorded and made available to you on demand. Expect to receive an email from us soon, which is going to include that link. Throughout the webinar, we will be asking a series of optional poll questions for you all to answer. You're going to see these polls appear in the vertical webinar control panel. Lastly, we plan to allow time at the end of today's presentation to answer questions from the audience. Feel free to ask questions at any time by clicking the hand icon in the attendee control panel. All right, well, that's about it from me. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers today, Andrew Gerhardt from INMOBI and Mike Brooks from WeatherBug. Andrew, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, and then Mike, you can do the same.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Gerhardt. I'm the VP of Publisher Platforms at INMOBI. My role is to oversee the adoption and expansion of our mediation platform across the global set of publishers that INMOBI has. Mike?
Hey guys, Mike Brooks here, SVP of Revenue at WeatherBug. Under my purview is things like programmatic monetization, direct sales, partnerships, business development, basically the business side of WeatherBug. So joined about 6 months ago, coming over from Verizon, very deep integration into the app space, but really excited to be here to talk to you guys about some of the big wins we've seen switching into a unified auction model. So let's go rolling.
Awesome. Just want to say thank you to Mike for joining. It's great to have you here on the webinar. I think it's awesome to have a publisher joining.
Oh, fantastic. Happy to be here.
So today we're going to talk about a few different things, all based around an awesome set of research that the INMOBI team has done. We surveyed publishers regarding their knowledge and experience with in-app header bidding, and we have some really interesting data to share today. But before we get into that, I think I just want to set the table with a few key terms. I think it's important that everybody has the same level of understanding, is on the same page before we dive deeper into the research and into in-app header bidding. So let's get started. This is likely very well known, but I want to talk about what a waterfall is, right? This is the main ad serving model and the main setup used by most ad servers and mediation platforms. It essentially uses a sequential ad serving mechanism. So it pings an ad source. If they don't have an ad, it goes to the next one, and on it goes until it finds an ad. So that's the waterfall model. Second, we have in-app header bidding. And so the new kid on the block, in-app header bidding allows publishers to pull in dynamic bids from DSPs, exchanges, or other programmatic players. And it allows them to compete in real time. And then that bid, the winning bid, is passed into their traditional waterfall ad server or mediation layer.
Hey, Andrew, one thing I do want to hop in there and talk about, and I think we might be jumping to it in a second, but I do want to make sure people understand header bidding is a desktop name. So it's a name given to this technology that was built around 3 years ago to allow for the first unified auctions. What we're talking about here is colloquially called as header bidding, but in reality is just a unified auction. So just so people at home understand, when you hear the term header bidding, it has to do with the website header on the desktop or mobile website. So when we hear header bidding and unified auctions, everything we're talking about here is really the parallel bidding rather than the kind of daisy chain in turn, but something that I found really interesting. So one thing I want to make sure to set the table with.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I mean, I think that's a very good point to make. I think the term header bidding has been commonly used, even though there is, of course, no header within the app. And so when I think about the way I like to think of it is, we started off with the waterfall. As programmatic exploded, we saw things move towards in-app header bidding. And I think of it as a progression. And things are progressing towards that unified auction. And there's a difference there, being that a unified auction includes all demand sources at the same time. in that unified auction, instead of having, you know, a segmentation of header bidding, which is then passed into a waterfall. And so we like to think of the unified auction as the ultimate goal for publishers to be using within their ad stack. Mike, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one thing I want to bring up is a fun analogy, and it has to do with kind of the Sotheby's auction house world. And say you're bidding on a $2 million painting. In a waterfall, that's basically the equivalent of the auctioneer going to each individual bidder and saying, hey, do you want to buy this painting? Okay, if no, go to the next person. Hey, do you want to buy this painting? Okay, if no, go to the next person. Versus saying, who wants to pay what for this this painting? So that is like a very real world example of what this is doing compared to what we've been living with for the past 10 years in programmatic.
That's right. Super inefficient. That's a great analogy. So let's take a look at why. So why is this all coming about in the past year or two? And why are we hearing so much about header bidding and unified auctions now? Well, we think there's a few different reasons. Number one, it's the explosion of programmatic. And so when we look over the past 5 years and looking towards the future, programmatic has continued to rise in popularity and in growth, and that will only continue to expand. Number two, the number of networks and buyers that an app developer has to work with or should work with has continued to rise. And so we see app developers continuously having to work with different partners through server to server, through tags, through RTB, through SDK. And then lastly, there's the importance of latency. You know, the research shows that a typical ad takes, you know, a second or longer to appear. And as users become more impatient, this is obviously a huge concern. Mike, what's your take on that?
I mean, I think we're going to talk about latency a little bit more in depth later in the conversation, but latency is a huge deal for us, right? Because a lot of our sessions in the weather world are very short. So if we're not able to deliver an ad within the first, you know, second or couple hundred milliseconds, we've lost our opportunity. So we'll talk a little bit later about some of the ways that unified auctions have helped us in a latency perspective. But it's a huge jump that you can make in a positive way.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at the current state of mobile app monetization as we surveyed our users. So we asked publishers, you know, are you currently using a mediation solution? I was shocked at the answer here, that only 52% of publishers are using a mediation platform today. That was very, very surprising to me, because we know that publishers who don't use mediation are leaving money on the table. So that was a very interesting answer from the survey. Next, we asked publishers about their monetization strategies. This one wasn't too much of a surprise. We see that the overwhelming majority, 57%, are using a waterfall-based system. You know, that's pretty common. The encouraging stat here, I think, was that a larger percentage, roughly 35%, were using some form of header bidding in-app. And I think that's higher than I would have expected to see. The surprising thing here was that 14% of publishers were only using a single ad network for their inventory. And that's just, again, going back to leaving money on the table and not effectively selling all of your inventory.
Yeah, I don't want to go ahead and say that if that's your setup, that's a train wreck. But if you're really only working with one demand source, you really need to broaden your horizon a little bit. This was a huge shock to me, that 14% of people who use a single network. And if you're there listening, mbrooks@weatherbug.com, call me. We can talk.
And Mike, what are your thoughts on the 35%? Was that higher or lower than what you would have anticipated?
I think that's higher, right? I think at the end of the day, everybody should be doing this, and that's going to be kind of my horse for this conversation. That said, in the research it'll show a little later, a lot of people think they know what's going on, or maybe they overcomplicate it. I would be surprised if 1 in 3 are really using it today. However, I wouldn't be surprised if this number was 70 or 80% at the end of 2019.
Yeah, I feel the same way. So we asked publishers, publishers who don't use header bidding, give us a sense of your revenue trends. And interestingly, 54% of them said that their revenues have not. They've stayed flat or they've decreased over the same amount of time. And so that sort of proves that power of they're leaving some money on the table. They're not really capturing the full value of the buyers that they have integrated. Interestingly here, 24% didn't have a way to track that, which seems shocking.
That'd be a tough business to run if you're not sure how that's going.
Yeah, I think somebody in charge of revenue might be out of a job if they couldn't track the revenue.
Right. And one thing I do want to say here, I don't really understand this 54% bubble. Mathematically, we'll talk about how this type of bidding works. And, I have been studying math a long time, and I don't really understand how your revenue could economically go down. That said, when we instituted this on the WeatherBug side, we saw an increase of 21% in CPMs within the first quarter. So, we saw a very big bump and have continued to see that rise. This 54% chunk must be a lot more remain the same, and that would be not a very good implementation, I would guess.
Yeah, it could be misconfiguration, certainly. So go to the next one. We asked publishers, how ones that are using a waterfall, how they're prioritizing, how they're structuring their ad stack. And not surprisingly, a lot of them are structuring it based on flat CPMs and historical data, which we know is extremely inefficient. You're using, again, historical data. You're using out-of-date CPMs that are out of date. Interestingly, if we look at the way that they're prioritizing their ad networks on the right-hand side, we see that roughly 21% are doing it arbitrarily, which seems horribly dangerous. And so definitely some room for improvement here with how people are prioritizing. Going back to that latency question, we wanted to ask publishers about latency without header bidding and how it's impacting their advertising and their user experience. Mike, how big of a deal is latency for WeatherBug?
It is the biggest deal. So I'll tell you about a time not so long ago in the history of WeatherBug when we had some ad serving challenges that led our overall latency to be 7 seconds. So that puts us very heartily in that little red triangle on the right. 7 seconds, what does that mean from a business perspective? That means that about 10% of our weather sessions showed 0 ads. It also meant that we have about 20% or to 25% of impressions that we were absolutely missing out on because of that setup. So, latency is a function. Everything is a function of revenue, but this is by far the biggest thing that we have done and will continue to do is to decrease latency, and that increases your impression volume for your business. It's huge.
Yeah, I think we'll touch upon that a little bit when we talk about integrations later, client side versus server side. But I mean, it's really surprising here to see, roughly 40% or greater are a second or higher for the ad to load. That's just too long, especially with like a banner.
Lose a ton of money. You're going to lose a ton of money.
Absolutely. So let's talk about header bidding. Let's talk about the current state of how things are going in the market. We asked publishers what their level of understanding is with in-app header bidding. I think this was interesting. We saw roughly 75% that thought they had a good understanding of header bidding, and only a small percentage that said they really don't understand it or have limited knowledge. To me, this is surprising because it is a new technology, and there's lots of different implementations and integrations, and the technology is a little bit confusing. And so this was surprising to me. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would love if this was the truth. People are probably overestimating how much they understand, because if there really was a 77% of people who had moderate understanding or better, then at least 80% of those people would be doing it. And even the 35% number, which I thought might be a little bit high, I think this is people overestimating it. Granted, I think unified auctions get a bad rep for being a little complicated, which I think is, again, a misnomer. But 73 or 77% of people saying they get it, I would heartily disagree.
Yeah. So when we ask publishers, what's preventing adoption? Why isn't header bidding being used more within app publishers? Interestingly, 31% said a limited understanding of the technology. So this kind of, I guess, is in contrast to the prior survey question. And then 11% had fears about latency, which I think I would bucket into a limited understanding of the technology, because in-app header bidding absolutely reduces latency. In the testing that we've done, when we've run A/B test waterfalls versus the simultaneous unified auction, it's upwards of a 200% reduction in latency. So that's absolutely one of the main benefits. So we wanted to know, who out there is using it, and if you're not, how likely are you in the next 12 months to begin using in-app header bidding? And I think we showed the stat earlier that roughly 35% said they were using some form of in-app header bidding, but 32% said they plan to in the next 12 months. I think that's a high number. I think it'd be excellent if all 32% of those people ended up using it, but still nice to see that there's a large percentage of publishers out there that would like to begin using the technology.
And Andrew, I would say early on, we were definitely in this bucket, right? The WeatherBug crew had been doing a very good job of optimizing waterfalls for a long time. And, the way that we got into header bidding or unified auctions, we didn't do what I would consider the optimal route, but we did kind of dipped our toe in the water kind of thing. So we actually had our waterfall, and we started by integrating you guys into that waterfall. And that's not by any means the most efficient way to do it, but it was a really easy way for us to test out a hypothesis that this was going to allow us to increase CPMs on a subset of partners. And overall, what we saw was it increased it for everything. So what we'll talk a little about what we did, but the ability to remove SDKs, the ability to decrease latency, we started by doing a kind of a half-assed version of it, but within a couple of months switched over to less and less waterfall over time. So I just want to say that if you're sitting there listening to this, you don't have to completely abandon ship today. I would recommend going whole hog on the unified auction piece, but we did not to start, but it proved to be very, very valuable.
Yeah, I think that's common, Mike. From our experience working with other publishers, I mean, doing a full ad, as you know from WeatherBug, doing a full ad server or platform switch is a lot of work, right? And it's nerve-wracking and scary, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, and there's a lot of revenue on the other side. And so we do see publishers using sort of a test bed, right? They implement the unified auction into their waterfall, test it out, and then make the larger switch.
Exactly.
So we want to understand, for publishers out there using header bidding, how they're doing it. Because as I mentioned, there's lots of different integration types out there. There's some platforms that have things done client side, there's some server side. And the type of integration really depends on the buyer you're working with. Some buyers are completely server side, and so you could use a server side approach. If you're working with ad networks or other buyers who require an SDK, that's where you may go into more of a hybrid approach, where the call might be made from the server, but then the SDK is used for rendering. For example, I know the team at WeatherBug had a goal to remove SDKs from their apps almost entirely, and so they moved toward more of a server-side header bidding model using INMOBI. And so, Mike, I don't know, how has that impacted WeatherBug? Moving to that server-side model. Were you able to remove SDKs? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these pieces play together and feed into the revenue piece. We talked about CPMs going up, but Eddie Dingles, who is our CTO and is an absolute machine, he knows that SDKs are valuable, but very rarely do you get a CTO who says more SDKs. So we came up with an agreement that we were going to be able to minimize SDK integration over time. And I think in just the past 6 months, we went from something like 8 or 9 on the ad side down to 2 or 3. So we were able to drastically decrease the number of SDK integrations but revenue and CPMs are up. So, the idea that you need an SDK for it to for this system to work, you will for probably your main players for your unified auction, but outside of that, you can get away with a lot more than you think you can.
I think that's right. I think especially with programmatic buyers, largely they don't need an SDK. It just depends on the buyer that you're working with.
For sure.
Next question wasn't a huge surprise. We asked publishers what kind of formats they're using within that header bidding. And I think these formats largely go with brand buyers and programmatic. We see a lot of spend in banners and interstitials in video. And so not a huge surprise here. Mike, that you guys are using primarily banners and videos, is that right? And have you seen, what have the results been across those formats?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when we talked about the CPM increases on this board, for example, our other formats are only sold direct. So video and banner being 320 by 50 and 300 by 250 were the majority of what is being included in the unified auction. And it's, everything I've talked to applies to those specific groups for us. We don't do interstitials. Full screen and other formats only available direct, but banner and video have had all of these things I'm talking about aren't even including interstitials, the CPM bumps and things. It's really banners and video for us.
Awesome. What was interesting here, we asked publishers, we wanted to dive a little deeper into video specifically. That's a specialty of INMOBI, is the video side. And what we saw here was that video is lagging in terms of adoption in comparison to the total set. So we see only 24% of publishers were using it for video. We do see a good percentage that plan on using it in the next 12 months. But it's interesting to see that format was lagging. And I'm curious, I'd love to see a follow-up question from publishers to see if that's due to video player integrations or something like that. But certainly interesting there.
I think, and I can speak to, for us, what video is just newer. So we only had video being a prominent part of our experience in the past quarter. So I know that we're a little bit on the later side, and though we do use INMOBI for that header bidding today, it wouldn't surprise me that maybe people are just a little bit more sensitive because they don't understand the video world as much.
In the next question, I found this really interesting. We wanted to, for publishers that are using in-app header bidding or want to, what's the value that's being driven for them? What's most important when they're looking to select a platform? I would have thought that revenue would be number one, or yield optimization or something along those lines, because revenue should be the main driver. Interestingly, brand safety was number one. Number two, I think, is absolutely spot on. Having transparency into the auction dynamics and having transparency into the buyers. That was really interesting. And then number four, I think, speaks to, what WeatherBug has seen in terms of benefits of header bidding, being able to pull more onto the server and reduce SDKs in the app. Mike, what do you think about these results that have brand safety as number one?
Yeah, I mean, I think brand safety is really more of a CMO challenge if you're talking about an app specifically. Can we go back for 1 second? I wanted to kind of compare what results we had. But the reason why we do header bidding, here's what happened to us. We went down over 60% with the amount of SDKs we had integrated. Our CPMs went up 21%. One of the things we haven't talked to yet is the ability to test new partners. So one of the opportunities that unified auction and a partner like INMOBI allows you to do is test and iterate much faster. So the level of effort required to get a new demand source in and tested is much, much, much lower. And Ed, who runs programmatic for WeatherBug today, has been able to test something like 10 new partners in the past month because it's been so easy to test in and out. And we've seen a ton of success there. So the testing is something I wanted to make sure we talked about. It was a huge plus for us. And then latency we talked about. Again, everything feeds into that idea of revenue. Me running revenue, that's kind of my jam. But in general, those are what we wanted to see, and that's what we did see.
Awesome. So let's look at the impact of in-app header bidding. We ask publishers, we want to understand more about revenue, right? If you're using it, has it increased your revenue? Because ultimately it should be. Surprisingly, only 36% said yes. Mike, how has header bidding increased revenue for WeatherBug? Do you have any, I mean, I'm sure you don't want to share all your stats, but any high-level things you can share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, look, CPMs increasing 21% is a huge deal, right? That's a fifth of your business that you're able to go up top. I would be interested to kind of dig into the nose here and see if these are people who are actually doing it. Again, going back to the mathematical point that if everybody's getting the highest bid as a publisher, I don't see how revenue could not increase. But maybe there's a technological thing on that side. The message that I want to send to people from this is going to be a huge plus. There's not a ton of risk. I don't really understand this part, but maybe they just integrate and they've just put it into a waterfall and haven't really migrated completely. So that could be an explanation.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair, right? Your team is on the ball, testing new partners, really working the integration. I mean, it's something that requires effort, right? You have to be integrating partners, making sure you're optimizing. So there's integration or technology things that are preventing that growth.
Yeah, and the other thing, I'll talk about the team structure for a second. Our programmatic team is really two folks. So Ed Arundale runs the show, and then Chris Thingus on his team. The two of them combined for the entirety of this programmatic revenue and getting partners in and out. So, if you're trying to size up team to team, we're doing it, even though we are mostly mobile apps. So we're about 92% of our business is mobile app. It's managed by two people. So it's very efficient business.
You guys are lean to mean.
Oh, yeah.
So we asked publishers, what are the top benefits of header bidding, if the ones that are using it? And this is where I got the answer I was looking for, which is better yield management, optimizing the stack, increasing the revenue. I think that should be number one. Number two, reduce latency. We've been talking about that a lot today. It was great to see that as number two. Mike, looking at, what are the benefits? What are the top things that WeatherBug was looking for, and what has it really done for your business?
Yeah, I think, look, number one is 100% of what we're looking to do, right? So grow the business with the same asset and just manage it and optimize it better. Everything else kind of feeds into that. So we knew we had a latency problem, and this was a way to solve that. We knew that testing partners in a waterfall was challenging. This was a way to solve for that. I think things like creative diversity eliminates failover, like the daisy chain style. Those are kind of pieces to a larger equation. But these two things also produces a better user experience. So at WeatherBug, we're really focused on the end user and retention and reviews. And if things aren't moving quickly, we can get in trouble. So this has been a huge boon for us.
I think you're right. I think number 6 feeds into number 2. I think number 7 is a nice to have. We do hear that complaint a lot, though, right? Within mobile apps, those users get really picky and they complain that they see the same ad over and over and over again. And so bringing more programmatic buyers and brand buyers to the table can help improve creative diversity. But again, I mean, it should be secondary to increasing revenue and reducing latency and ensuring a better user experience. So aside from the research or the survey that we did, the research team at INMOBI took a look at all publishers using the INMOBI mediation platform against publishers not using the mediation platform. And interestingly, they saw publishers using the INMOBI unified auction had 44% higher CPMs against the other cohort. And they saw publishers using the INMOBI unified auction platform had 48% higher revenue against publishers not. So definite improvements in the total revenue for those publishers. So we talk about the current state. We looked at where things were in the past. As we look to the future, how do we see things changing? When we surveyed the customers, I think we pulled out a few key themes in terms of, for us to see higher adoption rates with in-app header bidding or unified auctions. We really need more education in this space. We need publishers and buyers to really understand what the technology does, how to integrate it, and what the benefits are. And I think, we certainly see through the survey results, there's a lack of understanding about what the technology is and really the value that it can drive for publishers. I think there's also some standards in terms of how things are integrated, either through server-side or client-side integrations. How the bids are placed. Are they placed through an SDK? Are they placed through OpenRTB? There's somewhat of a lack of standards, and the education and standards really feed into that industry participation. Mike, any thoughts on how you see things progressing over the next year?
No, I really hope that the publishers, it's interesting because generally when you get on a panel or something public, you don't want to say exactly what's working because the people in the audience might be competitors, right? I like the publisher world because we're not really competitors. And if everyone goes this route, it really only helps them all individually and doesn't hurt the greater good. So that's just a weird competitive thing to be in. And that's kind of why I'm saying all the things that I'm saying. Like, this has been transformative to our business. We're going to build a stack around this idea of the unified auction. This is going to be the biggest driver for us as a business for the next 2 years. And just because it is for me doesn't mean that I get hurt if anybody else does it, which is actually very interesting from a competitive standpoint. So, when I say we're dropping SDKs, we're increasing revenue, we're testing new partners, our app is performing better. This, if the world doesn't catch up in the next 2 years, I would be very, very surprised.
Yeah, dropping SDKs, revenue going up, and testing new partners is like music to engineers' ears. Yeah. So I'm going to kick it over to you, JR.
Great. Looks like we got some audience questions. So let's see how many of these we can get through. The first one we got is, how long does it take to see results from mediation or unified auctions?
Yeah, I can speak from our specific answer. It's almost immediate, right? The first few weeks, you're going to see, you're probably going to need to make sure that all of the partners that you were working with before in a waterfall are bidding in via a unified auction. But assuming you're apples to apples and taking the technology piece out of it, pretty immediate. So I would say within the first 2 weeks, you'll see numbers go up.
Cool. Next question we have is, how has in-app header bidding met or failed to meet expectations for WeatherBug?
Yeah, for us, I mean, it hasn't really failed at anything because our goals, again, were decrease latency, decrease SDKs, increase CPMs, and we did all those. I would say I was a little bit surprised that we were able to see as positive a bump as we did. No matter what we do, we're a pretty big business. We've been around 20 years. We have a fair amount of revenue. So for it to be increased 21% for us was a very big positive jump. I was probably expecting less than that, and looking forward to making it more.
Great. The next question looks like it's coming from an advertiser perspective. So this one is, how do advertisers and brands benefit from unified auctions?
I'll take that. A lot of the work I do is on the supply side, but from my conversations with buyers and just from understanding the technology, it provides a few different things. It allows them to be more competitive. And so, some buyers always have to jockey for position within waterfalls. They may have to shave margin, pay a little bit more to get that top position, put in multiple price tiers, do different things to get more inventory from a publisher where they may have been priced out in the past. And so unified auctions allow them to get access to more inventory. Secondarily, it allows them to compete, whereas in a waterfall, they were slotted in there at some old CPM. Now they're able to bid more appropriately for every impression. And so they can actually compete for the inventory that they want.
Great. Next question we have is, when choosing between different mediation technologies, what sort of things should publishers look for in a solution?
Mike, any thoughts on that? And then I'll give my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, most of this was, for me, it's about trust, from my engineers, it was about level of effort for integration. So I will only do business at this kind of scale with people that I know and I like. I think from a technology perspective, the decision was made around what is the lift going to be and how long is it going to take, and if two are the same, go with one that is sooner. Although very few are the same, but if it's close, it goes to the engineers.
Yeah, I think I echo what Mike said, and then I think I'll add, there's a few different things. They should look at how the technology is integrated, whether it's a server-side, client-side hybrid solution, and whether that accomplishes your goals. Look at some of the past results that they've achieved. Look at the number of partners that they have available to integrate, and then look at the reporting system. It's really important that you have transparency into the different metrics, what's happening in the auction, and then it's all clear to you. And so, there's a lot of different things that go on, and you need to make that decision carefully.
Looks like we got time for just a few more questions. This one looks like it's directed to Andrew. How many game publishers are you seeing using header bidding with inventory like rewarded video?
Yeah, it's definitely increasing. I don't think we asked that specific question in the survey, but from the body of publishers that INMOBI works with, we certainly see a lot of games that are starting to use header bidding or explore the technology. It works with all formats. It's not just exclusive to banners or interstitials or video. It can be used for rewarded video as well, as long as the underlying technology is built to support SDKs, right? Because we know that with rewarded video, a lot of that is still done through an SDK. A lot of the ad networks are using those SDKs, but many of them now are supporting this model. We work with AdColony and Vungle, and both of them support dynamic bidding. The integration is a little bit different, but they do support it. Tapjoy is another one that supports it. So rewarded video certainly can be done, or in-app header bidding can be done for rewarded video.
Well, I think we got time for about one more question here. This one is, how large of a user base does an app need before you can see the benefits of mediation or header bidding?
So I'll take this one for a second. The way I answer this is, if you have a programmatic business today, then it's time to switch to header bidding. If you have 100% sell-through rate, good for you, and you don't monetize programmatically at all, then no need. But if you are like most of us and you need that, for us, we have about 14 million monthly actives, and we have seen a massive jump. I would say if you are, I can't think of something that's, if you monetize via advertising and you are working with at least 2 demand partners, which you should be, then header bidding is right for you.
Yeah, it's really not a question of scale, I don't think. It's not that this is only for the big guys. This is really for everybody. It's just a shift in the technology, that the technology is now catching up with the times, and look, we're in 2018. It's no longer just a waterfall thing where you're working with 2 SDKs, right? Now you need programmatic, you need multiple partners, and that's why this technology is here.
Great. All right, I think we're just about out of time, everyone. I just want to thank our speakers today, Andrew and Mike. Thanks so much for joining us. And on behalf of INMOBI and WeatherBug, I'd just like to thank everyone for taking the time to attend today. As a reminder, we're going to be sharing a recording of this webinar to everyone, so look out for that email to arrive in your inboxes soon. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.